While Chris Jericho looks back at his time in WCW as a dark point in his career, there's a lot to be said about his time in Ted Turner's wrestling promotion. Sure, he was one of many that was lost underneath the NWO machine, but Jericho would consistently put in the work to try and get himself over in pretty impossible circumstances. Along with this, Jericho was an amazing in-ring talent, blending styles from Mexico, America and Japan to create a hybrid moveset featuring high-flying and submission maneuvers. Jericho may not have been happy with his WCW run, but it was in WCW that Chris Jericho made a name for himself on a large scale. Of course, tape traders and hardcore audiences would have known Jericho from Mexico, Smoky Mountain and ECW, but Jericho was also in WCW while the company was destroying WWE in the ratings, resulting in Jericho's time in WCW definitely working to his benefit, even if his booking was questionable. So before he was Y2J, before he was the best in the world at what he does, and before he was all elite, let's take a look at the WCW career of Chris Jericho. While Chris Jericho was working in ECW in 1995 to 96, Eric Bischoff took notice. Eric was getting fond of taking talent from ECW, and Jericho was no exception. Offering him more money than he had ever been offered before, Jericho signed with WCW during the summer of 96. Jericho earned $165,000 a year for 3 years while in WCW. On August 26, 96, Jericho made his first TV appearance with WCW on Monday Nitro against Alex Wright. However, he had worked WCW Saturday Night and WCW Pro tapings before his Nitro debut. The night before his Nitro debut, Jericho actually wrestled Chris Benoit on WCW Pro, but the match was aired after his Nitro debut. Jericho came into WCW as a babyface, going as far to shake hands with those he couldn't defeat and thank them for the great match, as evident in his debut match with Alex Wright. Chris was not happy playing this role, as he rightfully believed the business was steering away from this kind of white meat babyface, and instead fans were embracing the anti-heroes of wrestling. That being said, if Chris raised his concerns early in his WCW run, it fell on deaf ears, as it took about a year and a half before Jericho would turn into a fully fledged heel. Chris Jericho wrestled Chris Benoit at Fall Brawl in 1996 in an incredibly underrated match. Benoit won the near 15-minute match, but this was the first time Jericho was able to show what he could do in his first WCW pay-per-view bout. From here, Chris was made a mainstay in the WCW Cruiserweight undercard, having good to great matches with the many skilled cruiserweight competitors in WCW who were arguably having better performances than those in the main event. Thanks to the working agreement WCW had with New Japan Pro Wrestling, Jericho was able to make his debut with New Japan in January of 1997 as Super Liger. Here, Chris Jericho was booked as the masked nemesis of New Japan legend Jushin Thunder Liger, and while it was a decent idea on paper and the outfit was kinda cool, the work Jericho showcased during his debut was pretty awful. Jericho complained he could not see correctly through the mask, resulting in him making mistakes during his debut match. Super Liger was a failure after just one match, and Jericho wrestled without the mask for his remaining 6 months in New Japan. Chris would split his time between WCW and New Japan during the first half of 97, where in WCW he continued to work as a babyface within the Cruiserweight division. A match highlight during this time period would be Jericho vs Eddie Guerrero at Super Brawl 7, where Jericho took the loss but again was able to show off his abilities on pay-per-view. Jericho captured the WCW Cruiserweight title at a house show in California named WCW Saturday Nitro. Just like WCW Boston Brawl that I spoke about in the Bret Hart video, this was not available on TV, but instead, WCW Saturday Nitro was an audio-only stream that you had to pay for via the WCW website. 1997 ended with Jericho dropping and regaining the title in matches against Alex Wright, but ultimately losing the gold to Eddie Guerrero at Fall Brawl in 97, another match you gotta check out after watching this video. Chris Jericho could not have been happier when management told him he would be turning heel at the beginning of 1998. Jericho's babyface character was even sickening Chris Jericho himself, and he was looking forward to portraying a new character on TV. The heel turn happened at Souled Out 98, where Jericho defeated Rey Mysterio Jr. for the Cruiserweight title and proceeded to destroy Rey's knee with a toolbox after the match. Chris may have gotten what he wanted now by becoming a heel, but Chris has also said that he had to fight for time on the microphone. Chris himself had to approach Eric Bischoff and ask for a few minutes, or sometimes a few seconds, on the mic before and after matches. Bischoff was always hesitant but eventually agreed, and it's thanks to Jericho's perseverance here that we got some of the most entertaining and memorable promos on Nitro from Chris Jericho. WCW had no plans in stone for Jericho. Everything that you saw Jericho do in WCW as a heel, from the man of 1,004 holds to the conspiracy victim, it was all Jericho's own ideas that he had to fight to get on TV. After the Mysterio match, Jericho defeated Juventud Guerrera in a title versus mask match at Super Brawl 8. Guerrera lost the match and was forced to remove his mask, which began a trend of Jericho collecting trophies from his fallen victims, such as Guerrera's mask, Disco Inferno's headband, and Prince Iaukei's Hawaiian dress. Next came what I feel was Jericho's best feud in WCW, his work against Dean Malenko. Dean was known as the man of 1,000 holds, a technical marvel in WCW who knew many ways to hurt opponents. Jericho, in his infinite wisdom, claimed he was the man of 1,004 holds, knowing 4 more moves than Dean Malenko, and therefore making him better than the Iceman. During the March 30th, 1998 episode of Nitro, after defeating Marty Jannetty, Jericho pulled out a long pile of paper that listed each of the 1,004 holds that he knew, and he recited them to the audience. Nearly every other hold was an armbar, with other classics such as the moss-covered 3-handle family Gridunzel and the Shooting Star staple Super Press. The magic here, and why it worked so well, was Nitro went to a commercial break while Jericho was reading the moves, and when Nitro came back on TV, Jericho was still stood in the ring reading out his 1,004 holds. In reality, Jericho spent the commercial break time getting the crowd riled up, drowning himself in booze just in time for WCW to go back on the air. It was all really well done, and Jericho deserves a ton of credit for this very funny and fondly remembered segment. Jericho would brag that he was much better than Dean Malenko, but he would also avoid him at all costs, refusing to defend his Cruiserweight title against the Iceman. Eventually, Jericho defeated Malenko at Uncensored, but this wouldn't be the end of the feud. A Cruiserweight Battle Royal was booked for Slamboree in 98, with the winner immediately facing Jericho for the Cruiserweight belt on the same night. The first bit of greatness happened during the entrances, as Jericho announced each and every Cruiserweight in the Battle Royal with insults. A highlight being when he said, "Damien can't afford a mask, so he's wearing paint, but one of these days, he'll buy a mask." A wrestler who appeared to be Ciclope won the Battle Royal after Juventud Guerrera shook his hand and then eliminated himself. Jericho thought he had hit the jackpot, but when he took his mask off, Jericho was shocked to find it was actually Dean Malenko who just won the Battle Royal. The crowd went absolutely nuts as Malenko went on to defeat Jericho for the Cruiserweight belt. The crowd reaction could not have been better here. They were loud and the planning had paid off. Chris was not happy at how he lost the title, and he said he was a victim of a carefully planned conspiracy. At first he blamed the WCW locker room, then he blamed JJ Dillon, then he blamed Ted Turner, and eventually Chris Jericho blamed Bill Clinton as setting up a conspiracy to remove the Cruiserweight title from his waist. It was all brilliant stuff. In particular, the vignettes with Jericho visiting Washington DC were very entertaining. Malenko was eventually forced to vacate the title and a rematch was booked for the Great American Bash. Jericho won the title after Malenko got disqualified. Malenko was then suspended the next night on Monday Nitro. At Bash at the Beach, Rey Mysterio had returned from his knee injury inflicted by Jericho at the beginning of the year, and he went on to defeat Jericho in a no DQ match after Malenko interfered. Jericho regained the Cruiserweight Championship from Mysterio the next night after he interrupted JJ Dillon while Dillon was giving the championship to Mysterio. Eventually, Jericho lost the title to Juventud Guerrera in a match at Road Wild, with Dean Malenko acting as the special referee. It was also in 1998 that Jericho introduced us to his personal security guard, Ralphus. Ralphus was a truck driver for WCW, but Jericho thought he would make a great TV character, and he sure added a further level of comic relief to Jericho's character. But you may be surprised to learn that Ralphus actually ended up with a WCW talent contract. Ralphus managed to get a $78,000 deal with WCW, meaning he was paid more than some of the actual in-ring talent. Chris was now setting his sights on heavyweight wrestlers. He defeated Stevie Ray for the TV title on the August 10th edition of Nitro, and would then go on to start feuding with Bill Goldberg. The feud started off with Jericho getting tainted wins over Goldberg. So for example, Jericho would know Goldberg couldn't make it to the arena, so he would take a count-out win off the record. It was all stupid stuff devised to get under Goldberg's skin, but the fans ended up getting really excited for the eventual Goldberg vs Jericho payoff. Just as the feud started to pick up steam, Jericho was told the plan on Nitro was for Goldberg to squash him in a 30-second match. Jericho refused, saying why not drag it out further and make a bigger deal out of it on pay-per-view, since fans were into it and they could draw some money with it. Jericho rightfully thought that too much time had been invested in the feud and they should capitalise on it. As it turned out, Goldberg didn't want to continue working with Jericho, stating that he doesn't do comedy matches and he would prefer to work with bigger names and allow Jericho just to flounder away in the mid-card. This was the beginning of the end for Jericho in WCW. He was upset about how the whole Goldberg situation was handled, and he felt that this was an example of how WCW and Eric Bischoff was never going to allow Jericho to be a main event player. In reality though, we need to look at this from an honest perspective. In 1998, a former Cruiserweight champion wasn't going to win the big one in WCW. The guys at the top of the food chain already had issues letting Goldberg into the title picture, never mind former Cruiserweight champion Chris Jericho. This isn't a knock on Jericho, it's just the reality of WCW in this era of creative control and big name contracts. Even in the WWF in the years that followed, Jericho still had to put in a ton more work before getting a title run, and even then, some fans see his time as undisputed champion in the WWF as a failure. Again, I'm not knocking Jericho, I'm a huge fan of Chris Jericho, it's just the reality of it. Of course it would have been good to see someone like Jericho get an opportunity in WCW, but the same can be said for over half the roster. On November 30th, Jericho lost the World Television Championship to Conan. From here, he would have stipulation matches with Perry Saturn, including the infamous dress match, where the loser was forced to wear a dress. Jericho won the match. At this point, Jericho was doing everything he could to avoid Eric Bischoff backstage, so he wouldn't need to discuss his contract. Jericho let his contract expire in '99, with his final WCW match happening on a house show on July 21st, where he and Eddie Guerrero lost to Billy Kidman and Rey Mysterio in a tag match. Jericho was never happy with how things went down in WCW, and you can't blame him either. He was another highly talented wrestler who ended up another mid-card name, even after consistently trying to get himself into better positions and also getting himself involved in some highly entertaining segments. Chris has been critical of how Bischoff ran WCW in the years that followed, saying that the difference in working for Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff is like night and day. Jericho never liked seeing Bischoff drinking in bars with the NWO guys after shows, and felt there was never a chance for anyone outside of his circle of friends to break through in WCW. He maybe had a point.